Um, Anyways, everybody, welcome. Thank you for spending your early Tuesday evening with us here. It's 4:30 here on the West Coast, 7:30 over there on the East Coast. And I want to welcome you to How to Land a Job in Silicon Valley in 8 weeks or less. Hopefully less for some of you, but hopefully, in the next 8 weeks. And the title of this presentation is really how to jumpstart your Silicon Valley job search in 2022. And so the goal that I want to come in with this within this presentation today is to, number one, even if you buy nothing from us whatsoever at the very end of this presentation, because we are here to promote something, I want you to walk away with how you can think about finding your next job here in 2022. If you've chopped on LinkedIn lately, there have been 300,000 marketing jobs posted in the last week. There's another 400,000 recruiting jobs, and everything kind of just cascades down from there. And we want to just we just want to plant that seed in your head and also think about, look, a lot of you have been thinking about changing jobs for a while. And we want to not only address that desire today, but we want to turn that desire and put some action in there today as well. And so that's going to be the premise of today's presentation, which is mainly going to be led by Lisa and Joe. I'm going to be in here offering my thoughts from time to time as well. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to them.
All right, awesome. Let's dig in. So we're going to walk you through kind of the sequencing that we run for the job search bootcamp. As Albert mentioned, it takes place over 8 weeks. And of course, you can see that in the title too. And we're going to kind of like talk you through the sequencing. And hopefully in the process of that, we'll do two things. We will help you get a little more insight, as Albert was pointing to, into how you can kind of speed up your job search, or if you're just getting one started, how you can kick it into gear. And then the second part, of course, is if you find some value in some of the insights and the things that we're trying to share, to kind of give you, that perspective, that experience that we have and that we've had from working with job seekers, especially over the last 2 years, pandemic and all that. And if that, if you see the value in it, we really would love to have you join the bootcamp, which starts at the end of the month. So those are kind of the dual purposes for it. We're really kind of a value first community. We try to help people get where they're going as much as possible. And so a lot of the stuff that we're going to walk through here in this kind of rapid fashion is really going to be from insights from the community, as well as kind of insights from working with folks doing these 8-week cohorts. I can't remember how many we've done now. It's quite a few. And as every time we do it, we learn more from job seekers, and we see job seekers teach each other new things too. And so that's a lot of the insights are going to come from that. So I'm going to dig right in. I'm going to kind of walk us through the 8 weeks and the process. You can drop questions or anything that you want to know more about in the chat. If we don't get to it right away during the presentation, we'll answer as many things as we can at the end. I think last time we had a few dozen questions. So if we can fit all the answers in, we will. And Elisa and Albert, of course, will chime in here too, as we kind of add different insights. So that being said, let's dig in. We already did introductions and goals. I kind of just gave you the lay of the land. We're going to talk through the whole process. For folks who don't know me, I am Joe. I am one of the community leads for Albert's List. I've actually been in the Albert's List community since about 2013. And then I've been a moderator and kind of a lead for the community and helping lead bootcamp since about 2.5, almost 3 years ago now. And then you all know Albert because Albert's the founder. And then Elisa is also one of our leads for the community as well. There you go. Here's the quick numbers on it. By the way, if you're not on the email list, make sure you got an email list, because there's a ton of great events and things like that, like the one that Albert mentioned that's happening after this. And we really are value first community. So there's lots of great resources. Some of you on this webinar have already probably come through the community. If you haven't, please go check it out. Tons of value, tons of folks to connect with, tons of ways to kind of get some extra help with your job search. So this is us three here. And in terms of like how this presentation functions, it can be helpful, and we get this question a lot about the bootcamp. It can be helpful for folks who are kind of in different sequences, people who are maybe transitioning careers, definitely. maybe you're a college student or a new grad, or you're kind of entry level, year or two under your belt, and you're trying to like kind of really move on up. Yep, can be definitely helpful for you as well. We can definitely help with folks who are experienced as well. If you are like a super experienced engineer or a super experienced marketer or some other kind of career discipline, we do actually have specialized boot camps as well for those that kind of go a little deeper in those areas. So just a note about that as well. And so these are some of the things that we've really sought to answer over the last couple of years, especially. How do we accelerate the process, right? And you may be asking this question like, my gosh, I am out here applying for a bunch of jobs and I see other people getting jobs. Like, how the heck are they doing it? Okay, we're trying to decode and demystify that process. And we're also trying to make sure that you know and can kind of configure the resources that you really need, right? Because the job search is different for everybody. And so we're really trying to level the playing field to make sure that that happens. And so we really kind of developed this 8-week curriculum that is based on Albert's experience as a job seeker originally, and then it kind of turned into a community endeavor, and then we turned it into the boot camp. And so it is really based on this idea that there's a lot of, kind of work that goes into making sure that you are growing your career. And this is sort of like developed as a hiring hierarchy. And Albert, this might be a good place for you if you don't mind kind of just, because this is really your vision chiming in to just kind of explain like why you developed it this way. And then of course, we'll walk everyone sort of through the week 1, week 2, week 3, and how these things all kind of fit in.
Yeah. So, I'm a marketer by trade. It's what I do for my day job. And, for many of you, you may have heard of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is all the wonderful things that you need in order to feel satisfied and fulfilled in your life. And I thought about it in the context of what it meant to have a job and really succeed at your job interview as well, because I always think about all the different combinations of elements of things that you need in order to go to an interview, say all the right things, sound strategically correct in terms of your particular career, and then based on all of that, move into the next offer stage. And so what exactly do you need in order to have all this happen? And these are thoughts that I had on some cross-state trips up and down California a couple years ago. And I came up with a hiring hierarchy, which is pretty much all the little bits of everything that you need in order to be successful in your job search. You're obviously going to look at this and it's going to feel very intimidating. And, I have no doubt that it is. But what you need is a little bit of everything. You don't need to be a master leader. You don't need to be somebody who has the absolute vision to succeed in whatever career you're going into, or have all the most wonderful metrics to back up your job search. You just need to have some of these things here and there. And so if you're able to do just that, and honestly, if you almost just master the first 2 levels, actually, because the second 2 levels are more senior based, I think, in my opinion, have at least an 80% chance of getting your next job. And the only reason why somebody doesn't like you and doesn't want to hire you is because you showed up with the wrong Zoom background. And by the wrong Zoom background, I mean, maybe you have like the Golden Gate Bridge in the back and they prefer the Brooklyn Bridge. And so that's how confident I am in terms of thinking through this job search and the job search tactics that we're going to teach you and show you today that matter for your present and your future. Thanks, Joe.
Awesome. Yep. Well said. The stuff at the top of the pyramid takes a while to get really, really good at, right? So just don't feel intimidated by it, because it's the fundamental stuff is the stuff at the bottom, and you keep layering and adding. So awesome. All right, let's talk a little about kind of the sequencing, because I think this is sort of the meat, right? The bread and the butter. So the first week, we really focus on understanding you. That is about making sure that your positioning is dialed in, making sure that you're taking care of the bottom of that pyramid, right? And so when we talk about like, what does it mean to understand you as a job seeker and kind of your position in the market, what you're going to do, what your strengths are, where you're hopefully headed, what resources do you need, all that kind of stuff, it really kicks into the bottom of the pyramid. So resilience is a big piece. Albert has talked a lot about this. This is certainly making sure that you have a cohort around you, whether you're using the bootcamp through Albert's list or the Albert's List community or some other resources, you're meeting people on LinkedIn, whatever it might be that you're up to. Part of resilience is just making sure that you have like a cohort of people. This can be people who are going through the job search. Those are your peers. This can be people that you've worked with or that you hope to work with. Those could be your mentors. It can also be family members and friends. It can be a therapist. It can be a business coach. I always approach it as this way of saying like, there's no wrong kind of resource, right? It's about having a bunch of good resources when it comes to resilience to support you, because let's face it, job seeking is kind of an intense thing and there's rejection involved, right? And that can be tough. That can be really tough on us. Another big part of understanding you is about identity. And that is really just kind of knowing what you want, who you are, where you're hoping to go, even if you don't have all the answers. And then what makes you a person of character, a person who is somebody that, your future employer, your future boss would want to work with. And the commitment, I think, is kind of that piece about just like you do what it takes to kind of get things done. So resilience, definitely, I think people know this one, right? You're going to hear a lot of no's. You just have to prepare yourself. You must be committed to your ability and to your habits. And so job hunting is a series of habits. And so if you look at really successful folks who do well, they use their calendar well, they use their apps well, they're very focused, very disciplined about time management. And they're disciplined about making sure that the resources are present for them. Identity, which is that second piece in that, that pyramid, is really focused on kind of making sure that you're positioning yourself where you are in your career path. So, I mentioned that you don't always know, and I think people run into this a lot. You don't always know like exactly what you're going to do. Some people know. They're like, hey, I'm going to be a lawyer, a doctor. I'm going to be working at Johns Hopkins, in 10 years at the infectious diseases unit, leading the whatever team. Like some people have that vision, truthfully. A lot of us don't. I didn't have that in my career. And so just being able to make sure that your positioning is dialed in and you're very clear about where you're hoping to go next, what you're hoping to discover and explore, and just kind of understanding where your goal is and mapping and connecting that to the role that you're hoping to get to. And then explaining like, yeah, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm hoping to do. This is where I'm going. That's that path piece that I think is really important. And then character is obviously like the gritty stuff, making sure that you're willing to do the work that it takes to be a job seeker. I mentioned the kind of making sure that you're focusing your time and your time management habits and things like that. And then also just making sure you have the right folks around you to help bring out who you are and make sure that you're successful. So yeah, I think I won't say too much more about the commitment piece, but I think when we talk about it in the context of the boot camp, it's about developing a habit and a rhythm so that you apply to a bunch of roles, you network around those roles, you find people who can give you good information about the company's orgs, teams, et cetera. And then, you go through the next phase, right? You get some interviews, you do some interviews, you practice, you work through that. You go down the road, right? It's all about habits. It's all about making sure that you're kind of creating that accountability and you have a team of folks around you that can help you do that as well. So that's kind of week one, understanding you. And Elisa, did I miss anything? I think that's kind of a pretty good quick look. And I always try to keep it pretty concise, but hopefully I didn't leave anything big out.
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job, and especially the resilience piece. It's just getting into the habit of, and I like to talk about it, and we'll cover it in some of the later slides probably, but batching your tasks so that you're more efficient. And then because you will get a lot of rejection and it can be a little bit disheartening, but it's all part of the process and it's going to make you stronger because you'll learn from each iteration. And so we're here to be that ecosystem to support you in that.
Yeah. Awesome. Love that. Yeah. Understanding you, right? There's a lot there in that piece. So week two, which I think is like, once you kind of get your squad in place and you kind of like map out like, okay, here's what I want to do next. Here's where I'm hoping to go. Here's kind of where I'm at. Make sure I've got good support, good resources, make sure I've thought through my habits, like time management, calendars, all that stuff you get in place. And then it's kind of like, okay, it's time to do the bread and butter, right? So this is fundamentals, skills, stakes, et cetera. And so this is like stuff that you all are definitely going to remember and be familiar with. So we talk about creating an inventory. This is incredibly important just to make sure that all of the skills and the experiences and the kinds of tools and technologies, all that stuff that's like, you've seen it in the job description, even if it's a poorly written job description, which we'll talk about more a little bit later. This inventory piece is really important because it does kind of make or break you matching to the potential role And then when you get that first or second interview, making sure that you are matched to it, like, okay, this person has the right kinds of skill sets, they have the right kinds of experiences and background, et cetera. So this is bread and butter stuff that goes on a resume, cover letters, all that kind of, fundamental stuff. And then we talk through, like, what do you really need to make sure that recruiters and hiring managers are going to be able to understand the answer to that question that I just kind of raised. Like, okay, does this person match what we really need for this team in this role? And so we talk through a lot about that. Like, what really is the basic social media presence you need? How do you make sure your elevator pitch is kind of fine-tuned? That the dreaded question, we talk a lot about, tell me about yourself. I think a lot of people are like, oh God, I hate that question. It's the worst. It's actually not that hard a question, but it's just about framing it in the right way. So we talk a lot about that. And of course, we talk about resumes, cover letters, we talk about networking, kind of making sure that you know what you want and where you're going out to actually find jobs, so that you're not dependent on, like, just on notifications from LinkedIn or Indeed with your particular job title. That's kind of all very fundamental, important stuff. And great. Yeah. Thanks, Albert, for chiming in there in the chat as well about kind of tech versus Silicon Valley and the Bay Area and things like that. And we do include, I think there's a question about Geraldine. We do include topics for seasoned tech workers for sure. I think that's a great question. So I'll just kind of tap on that for 1 second. People ask this a lot, like, okay, what if I'm super experienced in tech versus like kind of new? The boot camp's really kind of helpful for either one. I think that, if you've got a lot of experience in tech and you kind of know the landscape, and like, let's say you want to work for one of the big tech companies, the FANG companies, as they're called, and you're really trying to fine tune that process, and you're really focused, like, yeah, this can definitely help you do a lot of the stuff around networking, especially, and like how to find people that can get you into those rooms, et cetera. You might not need as much help with your resume, but you might get a lot more out of other parts of it. So we tend to find that people, find little core areas that they get the most value out of. So won't go too deep here. Resume fundamentals. We really talk about, like, if you haven't had this before, we really talk about how to either like really get your resume in shape or just to fine tune it, make sure that it's really easy for people to understand how to match you to the job, match you to the team, match you to the problems, challenges, opportunities that are inside the company that they're looking for people to get to. So definitely core fundamental stuff. If you're transitioning, definitely transferable skills. We talk a lot about that. We also talk a lot about, this is a big challenge that people ask about, is sort of like, well, what if I want to apply for more than one kind of job, like maybe program manager and project manager? Totally doable. We really kind of work through, like, how do you like hit those two tracks, and what kinds of materials you need to do that, and how do you position yourself and to describe yourself in that relevant way. And then we talk a lot about personal brand fundamentals too. And I think this is something that, there's a lot you could go into here. The one thing I'll tap on is that I think it's really about consistency. So whether you like it or not, when you're applying to roles, you're interfacing with recruiters, hiring managers, maybe you're doing a little outreach to, people that you might work with or might be on the team, like, all of your materials do need to be consistent and aligned, so that people can kind of get a good sense of, like, okay, this is what this person is up to. This is kind of where they're headed next in their career. And wow, we really need somebody that's kind of going to do that XYZ kind of work. So having a personal brand that is really like aligned and consistent goes a long way. So I won't say too much about that. I think there's a little bit of more that goes into it than it's just we can put on this slide. So, definitely job tactic fundamentals, touched on that already. Another core area, like, where do you find jobs? And ideally you find jobs that are kind of coming out of some of your networking. They're coming out of referrals, because it's a lot easier to get a job through that than to apply for a job with 700 people have applied for it. Super hard to get those high demand jobs. But if you kind of network your way in, you could find some different ways to get into that particular hiring team, that particular organization, et cetera. That's a good way to go. So that's like week 2, mastering the fundamentals, getting all your core materials, like where, how, why to do the networking piece. We've got a ton of like kind of curriculum or materials that go into that to help folks accelerate that process. So, okay, Albert, Lisa, did I miss anything on that week 2 mastering fundamentals?
No, I think that was really good. Sorry for the background noise.
You're good.
It's going to be all like, we have a network of career coaches, and a lot of our speakers are going to be plugged in, and it's all on making sure, whether it's resume rewriting or cover letter or, building your brand or interviewing, like any one of those areas, we will be covering in those first few weeks. And also just throwing it out there. If there's something specific you're looking for, between myself, Joe, and Albert, we'll definitely make sure that you get either connected to the right resources, or we spend one-on-one time with you to connect those dots.
Yep, definitely. Well said.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I mean, we've had a pretty diverse range of folks go through the boot camps. The one that we just concluded had, I think my favorite two people were actually, one was in bioinformatics, which is not a field I know anything about, but I learned something because it's okay, let me look that up. And then they, of course, asked, like, hey, would you tell me a little bit more about what that role actually involves? So like gene therapy, gene research, things like that. I think one of the two folks that were in bioinformatics got an offer within that first, I think 7 weeks or so. I think they were actually not quite finished with boot camp when they got it. So that was really cool to see. So we do have folks that, they get a lot out of the fundamentals, even though they may have a more highly technical or specialized field that they're in. And so it's not like we can answer all the questions, but we can send them to a great career coach. We make those kinds of recommendations all the time. We can send them to a resume writer who like really has experience in their industry, things like that. So cool. So those are the first kind of couple of weeks, week 1, week 2, understanding you, and then mastering fundamentals. And then we get to the sort of third and fourth week is like really deep bread and butter stuff, right? This is where like you put all that early work in, and you are, kind of in that process of like, now you're like getting some potential opportunities, and you have to kind of like have the right kinds of conversations. And so we talk through the interview process. Almost always there's a recruiter screen. That's that 30-minute call. If you're kind of new to the process, you're going to run into that a lot pretty quickly. And then usually there's a screen with a hiring manager and or a full interview. Oftentimes you'll get referred to different people on the team to have conversations. There may be like homework or an assignment involved. Like, can you do this little thing so we can see how you work if you're a marketer, or how you work if you're a data analyst, or whatever it might be, give you a little kind of problem solution challenge. You may get conversations with other team members or executives. Maybe like you're on a particular team, but they run everybody through the, director of operations, because they like to kind of meet each person and just get a feel for them. Those are very common parts of the interview process too. There's a lot of context that goes into that. And we talk a lot about that process. And one thing I will say for sure is I think a lot of people see these things as challenges, like, can you pass, fail? And that's true, right? You kind of got to make sure that you're like able to answer questions about why your skills and your expertise and your background might be a good fit, and where you're hoping to go, and why that really aligns with the role or the team. The other thing is, the more touch points that you have in the interview process, the more you can assess two things. One, is this a job, like a workplace that I would actually like to be in? Do they have the kinds of resources and support? And are people talking about their work in a way in which I can see myself fitting into it, right? So you can actually get that reverse screen. And then I think the other thing that I like to remind people too is that, we get so caught up in this sort of like gamified interview process. And, look, let's be real. Lots of apps and software and lots of the way that it's designed kind of make us feel like it's this game we've got to try to win. But the reality is, as soon as you get the offer and you win, you win per se, suddenly then you have to be successful in your new job, right? And so when Albert was sort of talking through that pyramid and the hiring hierarchy, I think one of the things that we really try to focus on in the boot camp that people don't always get is like, you need the answers to what is that first 3 months, first 6 months, first 12 months have to look like what am I really going to be goaled against? What am I really going to have to get done and do and be successful? What relationships am I going to need to create? Who am I going to have to work with or partner with? And you can learn a lot of that during the interview process. So that's something I think that's really kind of unique about the way that we approach it too. That context is really important. And of course, the last thing that you get into that offer and the negotiation stage. And I'm a nerd, so I'm just going to like admit it right off the bat that a lot of people think that you only negotiate salary. But I say my feeling and my experience has been watching people in many different industries is that when you get into the negotiation period, you're actually kind of telling them how you're going to operate once you're in the workplace. Like if you do a good job of negotiating and you're very careful and thoughtful and you do your homework and your research, you're actually showing them what you're going to do in that first month, 2 months, 3 months, like how you're going to negotiate problems, challenges, opportunities. So it's a really great opportunity to shine in the process. So I'll shut up about that, but I like to mention those kind of extra things because I think those things are part of what make you successful. Not just in the interview process, but also as you kind of, if you get an offer, as you kind of onboard. So this is definitely like a primo Albert slide. I love how he always talks about this. This is what you have to know about what's across the other side of the table is that hiring is kind of risky. And, they're kind of thinking to themselves like, gosh, I need someone who can kind of come in and hopefully pick it up pretty quickly and help solve some of these problems, slot into this particular team. Like, you kind of have to understand like what's across the table, and that context is incredibly important. And then we talk through, the kinds of questions you get in an interview. We also talk through and share a lot of resources around like, okay, how do you deal with these very common questions? Like, tell me about yourself, or tell me about your time when you failed and how did you fix the situation? So some of those questions are kind of terrifying until you get used to answering them. And then we also talk a lot about like kind of hypothetical questions, analytical stuff where they're trying to kind of understand, how does this person actually think? So we do walk through that process quite a bit. We also talk a lot about nuts and bolts, what to expect, what to ask, what to look for, what to test in terms of the waters, questions that can help you not only, as I was saying before, kind of assess what's across the table, but like, what am I going to need to be successful over here in this work environment? And are they going to provide it or not? So, yeah, this is definitely core stuff when we talk about mitigating risk. I tapped on that, so I won't go too deep, but I think the one thing I'll say is, if you think back to that pyramid, the hiring hierarchy, knowing what's across the table and the context and what's important, and mitigating that risk, and just the kind of explaining how you're going to match and fit in, is the stuff that gets you to the near to the top, right? That's the stuff that gets you towards that leadership stuff, because that's what helps people know, like, okay, this is someone I can count on when we get there. And then the stakes piece, I think that's really important, right? You want answers to these kinds of questions. And you don't necessarily ask these questions in a direct fashion, but if you can get answers to these in your interview process, you're going to have a good sense of like whether it's a good fit for you. You're going to have a good sense of whether you're going to be successful and what it's going to take to actually kind of go through and like meet the stakes. So yeah, and then of course, like just thinking about the context of all the things around you as the person who would sit in that role. What kind of person you report to, what are the customers, what are their needs, what kinds of colleagues and partnerships do you have to forge, what is the goal overall for the company, and what is the context or the market or industry. These are all good pieces of context. And we talk through this a lot. I'm a marketer, so I could like tap on this for another 10 minutes and talk about like understanding the context of especially industry, company, customers, et cetera, is what really helps you shine with your boss and your colleagues, but like making sure that you hit that context. So we talk a lot about that too, because even if you are able to talk just a little bit knowledgeably about those kinds of contexts, people will begin to already be like, oh, wow, this person like, Liana really understands, she really took the time, she looked at some of our customers and really understands like how we actually have to work with this partner, et cetera. So very important stuff. Yeah, we run through this stuff, core, how do you determine the stakes, got to do your homework. Got to get a good understanding beyond just looking at some Glassdoor reviews, like what kind of place this is to work, how are people successful, who used to work there and what are they doing now, that kind of research to see if you can kind of get a sense of what's going on inside the company. So, oh, cool. Thanks for dropping your LinkedIn there, Lisa, into the chat. Oh, and by the way, other folks, please drop your LinkedIn profiles in, add us, drop your LinkedIn profiles for each other. One of the things that we talk about, which I tapped on earlier, is that it's a cohort approach. And so, hey, even if you just walk out of this particular session and you don't sign up for the boot camp, add us, interact with us, because we are now part of your job search journey. And we love that, right? And you are part of each other's job search journey. That's the very first lesson, maybe like even before week one, is it's a team sport. You can't do it by yourself. So, weeks 5 and 6 is more in that leadership piece. So we talk a lot about kind of like how to navigate change in your career, especially if you're transitioning, leveling up, and how to build those leadership skills that are kind of towards the top of the pyramid. So there it is: dynamics, vision, metrics, and then into leadership. This is like really the ability to kind of like talk through that once you get all that context information, the ability to really kind of like translate like, hey, here are the things that I've done in the past. Here are the situations, experiences, et cetera, that I have. Here's how I could see myself slotting into and fitting into what's going on at this particular org. And just the ability to be flexible and read, I call this reading the room. That's a huge leadership skill. Of course, that's a lifelong pursuit. It's not like you're going to figure it out all in boot camp or a webinar, but reading the room and understanding what's important to people and how you can influence them for good. And be good business partners to them is a really big part of that, that kind of that piece. And if you can speak about that vision, right? Like, and I'll give you just a quick example because people talk about that question I mentioned earlier, like, tell me about yourself, which seems like the most boring question on earth. But a lot of times what people are sort of saying is like, okay, nice to see you. Like, you're here. Like, why are you here right now? Why now? Why are we having this conversation? And if you can answer that question and say, you know, I really like one of the companies we talked about in the last cohort was Discord. They're this huge community app. If you don't know them, they're kind of cool. They're doing some really interesting stuff. So if you can answer and say, like, you know, one of the reasons I really love Discord is that it's sort of has this employee owned or kind of cooperative shared responsibility model. And that's also how you treat your community. That's actually something I've been working on in my career for the last several years. The last 2 years I spent X and Y. And that really, you know, I think is setting me up to potentially be a really great marketer on the Discord team, or a really great, you know, business analyst on the Discord team. And you could talk about, like, I noticed that you all do X, Y, and Z. You know, I really see myself sitting in there and exploring and discovering. So that kind of matching, we talk a lot about. I'm just doing a short version of it, but you know, that's kind of a big part of that process too. Yes, thank you. Adding your LinkedIn's in the chat. Fantastic. Love that. And then we also talk about kind of business impact, right? I think that's always a challenge, is to, like, you know, you got to get good about kind of bragging about yourself a little bit, like being able to talk in a leadership way, like, well, I helped to drive this kind of change and it drove these metrics. I delivered these kinds of projects and these kinds of timelines, revenue, things like that. So we talk a lot about that process too, and how to kind of do that. And then leadership, of course, I talked about that influence and that context-driven piece. And I want to mention, you know, I mentioned Discord. I think this is a really good example. Discord has a new COO who joined in maybe November or December. And I read this article because I was kind of like supporting someone in the last bootcamp cohort who's applying for an analyst or a data type role. And I looked up this interview with the COO, and she described, like, it's so great. I think this is applicable to almost any job search, right? Is, you know, and leaders thinking about yourself as a potential leader in that org. And she described it, you know, somebody said, well, what do you do when you get, you know, like, what do you think is the most important thing when you get a new problem, right? And I'm paraphrasing here, but she described, like, I don't apply the exact same tactics to this new situation. I try to listen in a way that lets me see what the context is and how some of the things that I've learned would allow me to repurpose those learnings. Like, can we take some of those ideas or those ways that we fix that problem or address that opportunity and maybe change them or repurpose them? And I know that sounds really boring, so I apologize for that, but that is the definition of, like, context-driven leadership and influence, right? It's being able to read the room and understand, like, what's important and to apply past skills, experiences, et cetera, in a new way. Okay, I'll shut up. That was probably super boring. But I think that leadership piece is really kind of important piece, and we do talk about it a lot more. And I think that's where we get kind of dynamic when we work with each cohort. It's a little bit different. We really talk through folks through that, like, well, tell me about your experience, and let's talk about how you can position yourself in the context of this company. And I'm sort of now kind of infamous for making a loom. I tell people, like, tell me the companies you're going after, and then I'll make you a 5-minute loom that tells you what I think the context is and what you should think about and how you can kind of, like, address it. So we do a lot of that hands-on stuff too. Okay, so let me stop there. Albert, at least, did I miss anything in that kind of leadership dynamics, reading the room? That whole category.
Great. You know, your Loom videos are a thing of legend, so hopefully people will be signing up to see more of those. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, same. No, I think Joe just talked about kind of, I mean, covered so much in this session. And so, and by the way, if you have questions after this, feel free to connect with Joe or myself, and we're happy to just chat with you one-on-one about something that takes place behind the scenes. But yeah, no, I think, and it's so great that everybody's dropping their LinkedIn, and hopefully what happened last time was the chat box closed and I wasn't able to, but the whole sense of this boot camp is building the community and just being top of mind and just sharing your message and what you're looking for to everybody in the group. And the more you share and you're really authentic about your approach, the more you'll be top of mind for other people when they hear of openings. You'll kind of be the first name that they think of, whether they tag you through social media or connect you via email or call you to tell you about it. So I feel like that strong sense of community is something very unique we have at boot camp that Joe, Albert, and myself try to foster, in addition to kind of the core fundamentals of the coursework.
Yeah, love that. It's such a good one of the things I tell people to your point, at least, is like, people are like, how do I know if I'm doing this boot camp right? Or how do I know if I'm doing job search right? And I'm like, well, I mean, if you you actually have people around you, like in your cohort, who are, whatever you might call them, your peers, your mentors, your cohort, folks new and old in your path and your journey as a job seeker. And they're literally DMing you, calling you, emailing you to say like, oh, wow, Chris, like I just saw the perfect job for you and you got to see it. Or I just heard somebody say something about their team and it sounds like the kind of place that you would succeed, right? You want your search to be like finely tuned in all of those ways, so that your community of folks, even if you're not like heavy networker, which I know, we have a variety of folks in the boot camp. Some of them feel like more extroverts, some of them are introverts, some of them are just kind of introverts today, because we all are a little bit with the pandemic, realistically. It's hard, right, to be in that process, but having a community is a really important part of that. And I think that when that's happening, and I just really appreciate that.
And I think the thing with, our cohort is, even though that first cohort technically ended the first week of November, people are still talking away there every single day. They're wishing each other happy holidays. They're talking about where they're going for a hike. And so you become friends. And so, you get out of this boot camp exactly what you put into it. If you go in with the intent to connect and to really just leave it all out there on the field as you hunt for that next opportunity, you're going to end up doing pretty decent. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, I am one of the folks that I mentor is a product manager, and we're in touch, and she is awesome. And she was in the very first cohort like 2 years ago that I was part of. So, and she's taught me things, right? Because a great mentorship is not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. And I'm not a product manager, I'm a marketer. And, I've learned so much from her, and, I've had a chance to positively impact her career and help her, kind of navigate the waters as she moves from like mid-career to senior level product manager. So it is long game, and it is great to have those relationships and those opportunities, and to keep those conversations, going. And I know many of our job seekers that have gone through the boot camp are still in touch with their cohort, and that's awesome. We want that. Okay, so week 7 and 8. Just going to walk you through that last part of it, kind of wrapping it up. This part, I think, is a little more like that fundamentals, right? It's kind of like nuts and bolts. There's a lot of standard sequences that go into it. So you get to the point where they're like, okay, cool. We like this person. We feel like Maria is a great fit. Now we're going to put out an offer like, hey, can you hang tight? We're going to give you that offer next week, or you can expect to hear from us soon, whatever the case may be. And, we talk through a lot of the nuts and bolts, right? Like, don't stop searching until you sign that offer letter. It's not official until you get that contract, you sign it, and you get the start date, right? That's the reality. We talk a lot about kind of terms of the offer, especially negotiating, like some of the common kinds of structures for contracts, especially now, because you get like W-2 versus contract, but there's also a lot of variations on that. We talk a lot about especially now, the flex benefits piece, like working in the office, working from home, working hybrid. What kinds of like technology and tools might you need to kind of do the hybrid thing versus in person at the office. Talking through a lot of those kinds of core, nuts and bolts of like how to negotiate. And we do a lot of that's another one where we do a lot of customized, kind of personalized, like, okay, tell us about the scenario that you're dealing with, and what do you need some answers to? How can we help you kind of triage the situation? Because negotiation moves very fast sometimes. So we try to keep that very hands-on. We talk through salary negotiation and market research. I feel like a lot of people kind of know how to do this, but I don't think we've yet had someone go through the boot camp who hasn't learned at least one thing that changed their salary negotiation or their overall contract negotiation, where they're like, oh, wow, that went a lot better or smoother. I got a little bit more that I wanted because I hadn't thought about that thing. So, just like really hammering your sequence here, even for experienced folks, I think is something that's really, really, we found really helpful. So so that's the 8 weeks. I think we've given you all kind of hopefully a good sense of how it typically works. There's a lot of information there. We've kind of talked through it here. Here's kind of the basics of the actual job search. We've done this for a long time. There's a lot of people that we involve in the process. to kind of help configure your experience to make sure that works really well. So if you added up, just the 8 weeks that we do, which is a weekly call, we do a bunch of resources and webinars that go around it, as well as like mock interviews and things like that. The value is like pretty high, right? So we don't charge a ton for the bootcamp itself. We're running people through the cohort model, but we add a ton of extra services. And then of course, if you need extra like help writing your resume, if you need extra career coaches, things like that, we provide a ton of potential referrals and things like that too. So this is kind of the like nuts and bolts. If we were to add up the cash, this is what you'd be getting out of it. I always say in these intros, I always tell people, I'm like, we try to provide way more value than you could possibly imagine. Like we're over deliverers. That's kind of Lisa and Albert and myself and how we approach it. So yeah. Oh, hey, cool. Albert, I didn't update the first slide with the correct dates, but I did almost update the 2022 calendar for this next cohort. So here's a timing for it. We also do the sessions and record them and make them available on YouTube after. So if for some reason you miss a week, no problem. We've got you covered. I mentioned we do these Monday mock interviews, which Albert runs. Yeah, and then we do like kind of a LinkedIn chat group for each cohort to help people stay in touch. So this is kind of the extra wraparound stuff that we do for the boot camp. And I think that's kind of everything. I'm not a hard seller, so I'm not going to be like, you absolutely have to do this, but honestly, the value is pretty incredible. And we love doing this stuff. We love working with people, and it's like got to be one of our very favorite things. So yeah. Okay. Questions, comments, things like that. Albert, did I miss anything? I think we kind of covered the full, like what that 8 weeks looks like.
And I just dropped the Eventbrite link in. We have
Awesome.
8, I believe, RSVPs already for our early bird, 7 more early bird tickets to go until
Fantastic.
the price goes up to $149. And so what we just gave you there and what Joe just gave you there is what it looks like for you to find a job in the next 8 weeks. And truthfully, like I can be a cheap person too. If you wanted to go back and take a look at this video recording and just create your own roadmap and do your own job search from there, you're more than welcome to. I hold nothing against anyone just looking to better their life in one way or another. But the difference between the true difference in this whole boot camp is that besides going out and outlining your own job search, it's also finding your own accountability people. It's being able to get that structured information, right? None of these things, for the most part, were ever taught to us growing up, going through high school, college, whatever. It was, put your resume out there and pray for rain. And that's not a strategy. That's hope. Hope doesn't pay your bills. At least it normally doesn't. And so as you mull through what you want to do here today and for the next 13 days with this boot camp, you think about, what exactly this boot camp will bring you, right? It's the accountability that we're going to bring to the table with. You're going to have the opportunity to talk to interesting and decision maker type people every single week, recruiters and such. You're going to have a chance to really get your job search under a microscope. And yes, it would work for remote only focused job search as well. So whether you want to eventually go back to the office or never go back to the office, this is the type of boot camp that will help you get there and figure that out. And not only that, but it'll also, hopefully you'll learn something new along the way too, because, job searches have changed. I know for a fact that, my own mother worked for one company for her entire life, from like the 1980s all the way through 2015. She wonders why I switch jobs so often. And I jokingly tell her that it's, because I learned those skills that I now run job search boot camps. But it's we don't live in the same world as our parents and grandparents. Few of us, if any of us, will be getting those grandfather clocks and nice brass watches, and it'll rather actually be learning these strategies that are going to help set you apart, and they're going to build you your resiliency. They're going to build you your attitude, and to really be scrappy as you figure out where things go, as things move forward. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think one other thing I just add really quickly to that too is that like the process, it's not, and I dropped into chat too, because people ask like, okay, how many people actually get a job in 8 weeks? Which, by the way, 8 weeks is an incredibly fast timeline to get a job. And yet some people do it. And we get so jazzed when that happens, right? We're like, oh my God, that's awesome. Because it's, people master the process. But one thing absolutely 100%, the entire cohort is it accelerates your job search. There's just no question about that process. And I think, people talk about like, oh gosh, networking and some of these things that they maybe don't love to do as much. And I'm not really a natural networker. I've had to teach myself to do it because I feel very nervous in a room full of a ton of people. Like it's not my first inclination to do, but I learned how to deal with it. If you accelerate the process by doing something like this, like Albert said, whether you do the boot camp or you just kind of start to create your own 8-week, whatever your sequence is, whatever your habits are, like really getting it all in process, you speed that up, you accelerate that process up. And, you just can't really go wrong because it really is kind of this process where, the rest of your career, whatever you might decide to do, being able to access this kind of approach is something that I think is helpful. So.
And Joe, I think it's also helpful to mention that you're kind of your own graduate of this boot camp too. You were looking for a job
This is true.
in the middle of COVID and had a job that was affected by COVID. And you went through this entire curriculum that we now teach. And lo and behold, in 8 weeks, you found yourself employed.
Yep. I actually went through 2 layoffs because I work in startups. And so, it happens a little more regularly. I went through 2 layoffs and then got hired a third time, all in the last 2 years. So yeah, I've kind of had to put myself through the boot camp process a couple of times. So it does work. I don't recommend getting laid off, twice and having, that's a kind of a lot of work. If you can avoid it, please do. So.
Hey, Joe, are you able to, Tracy was saying, I guess there's a slide on additions, the second to last slide on pricing, so just wanted to see it again. And then Geraldine, I know you said the Monday meeting is lecture oriented, so it's a hybrid. So there will be a speaker talking through the fundamentals and some key action items that we're wanting you to complete, and then it'll be very interactive where so for our resume session, our speaker usually goes over the fundamentals, like what ATS looks for, how do you optimize it, how do you write bullet points, and then we go into sort of interactive mode where we'll look at folks bring their resume, he'll help rewrite some of it so you get a sense for how to do it. So it's almost like instead of giving you the fish, teaching you how to fish. So it's more you can prepare for it and you bring to it, the more you'll get out of it. So it's very dynamic, I guess. It's not webinar folks talking to you.
Yeah, we keep it interactive on purpose. And Tracy, I've got the slide up for you, but it's $119 for the early bird, right? And then the price goes up to $149. And I think Albert, does early bird close? Is it based on
it closes when we run out of early bird tickets to sell. So
oh, cool. Okay, so there's a few more. I think you mentioned. Yeah,
we have seven more, and then it goes up to $149.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So another slide before this one. Oh, okay. What's the slide before this one? Yeah. So
this one? Cool.
Yeah. So we do offer a lot of different things, right? So if you think about it and you go and you look for a career coach on Albert's list, and we have hundreds who are career coaches who we don't make a dime off of. It is very likely that they will charge you a pretty penny for all of these things a la carte. Your interview prep will probably be an hour to 2 hours and cost you $400. We're throwing that in kind of for free with our mock interviews. Networking and learning how to network will probably cost you because you need to figure out what you want, how you're going to say it, and then you're going to have to go out and practice it. You might have to pay for an event here or there once COVID ends, and so forth. A resume review that's going to cost you a pretty penny depending on who you're going to do as well. Because some of these places will give you 2 or 3 edits and then not much more, and so forth. And so you can read faster than I can speak it. And so when you consider that you can get this all for a low 119 to 149, my goal and Elisa's goal and Joe's goal here is to just make sure that you can get hired and that you have a fighting chance out there. You don't need to be super wealthy. You don't need to be someone who's got connections in high places. You just need to show up, be ready to work, have that ambition, and you do even like 3/4 of that, and I guarantee that you'll be walking out with more opportunities than you walked in with. And that's the ultimate measuring stick here, is that you're going to walk out with a multitude of opportunities, and that's going to be a difference maker. Because a lot of us, I remember as a new grad watching friends get like 3 job offers out of school, and I could barely even scrape together one. I want everyone to come out of here with like 3-4 job offers, and I want us to be debating and discussing the merits of company A versus B, C, and D in our LinkedIn chat. And that's kind of my goal for you. Just an irrational amount of abundance so that you have no idea what to do with yourself. That's what I love.
Yeah, I was just going to add too, this is just back of the, as you were noting, Albert, this is just back of the envelope math, right? Like we really try to over deliver and make sure that you can speed up your process of job seeking. This is sort of basically what it would cost you to do some of these individual things if you went out and paid for it separately. But it's not like in 8 weeks, you're going to do every single one of these things super in depth. So we absolutely recommend and encourage people to take advantage of extra services and support. And we'll answer honestly, like, okay, you might want to get a little more help with your resume in this area. Here are some resume writers you could work with, right? So it's not like we're going to, tell you should do all these things in 8 weeks, because it can be a lot of work. And of course it's personalized and different for everybody, but we really try to like over deliver and make sure that we help you with a bunch of these really core fundamental things so that your job search is accelerated. I think that's an important thing to mention too. And then there was a question too, I think, about kind of like helping people kind of focus, like, great answer, Elisa, in the chat. You don't have to come to boot camp with target companies and opportunities, but if you do, we can help you focus on pursuing those roles. People ask this question, so I do actually want to kind of answer it because I've gotten this question a bunch in the recent past. People say, like, do I really need to know exactly what I want to do before I do this boot camp? Or, can I kind of come in and be a little more exploratory and just like kind of get the core skills? Totally up to you. You can do both, but if you are seeking to, like find a role and get hired in the next, 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks, whatever, like you're really focused on like getting that full-time role, whatever it might be. It's going to go faster if you know where you're headed, right? So we do a lot of the core work in that understanding you, right? And then mastering the fundamentals the first couple of weeks. But, it is important to note that like this boot camp, in terms of literally getting hired, the third of the people that get hired that I mentioned in chat, like within that eight or so weeks, they know what they're trying to go right there. I'm looking for a VP of operations role at this type of company in this type of industry. So if you have answers to that, you can accelerate your job search significantly. If you don't, it might take you a little bit longer, but these are all good core skills to have. So I just kind of wanted to be straightforward and honest about that point too. So, and then I think people asked about replays. That was answered in the chat as well. So I'll kind of leave that alone. One other person kind of asked a great question. Kelly, you asked, hours a week do successful job seekers spend on their job hunt per week during the boot camp? Oh my gosh, I love that question. It varies, but wow, some people really put the work in. I would guess, and Lisa and Albert, you can chime in here too. Some of our like folks who've literally gotten the job in 8-9 weeks, they're putting in probably 20-25 hours a week on the job search. Some people are doing this boot camp while also working. We get that. So you might not be able to do that, or you might have to do a lot of that time on the weekends or the evenings or whatever the case might be outside of your work schedule. But yeah, I would say 20-25 hours. it's a little higher for sure when you're in the interview process, right? Because like, let's say you get 4 or 5 interviews, you're kind of in that phase of the job search and you're like, okay, I got to do my homework. I got to do interview prep. That's always more time intensive than anything else. And so, that is the part where they're kind of on the high end of that 20, 25 hours. So. Did I miss any other questions in chat? I think we got everything.
I think you hit all of them. I've been trying to answer them on the background too.
I think Geraldine asked a question like about kind of the meetings being like lecture oriented versus like brainstorming. It's a great kind of question to bring up. Each of the weekly Zoom sessions, we're typically covering a topic. So there's like a presentation. We'll talk about some examples. We may do some screen sharing. We may say, hey, do you have an example or two that you'd like us to walk through in this area? Awesome, let's do it. So we do kind of, it's like a mix of interactive, like presentation plus hands-on. And then in terms of like brainstorming time and things like that, we do make ourselves available. We typically use a group chat for each, cohort on LinkedIn. And so people will ask a lot of questions. I do a lot of the Loom recordings that I mentioned, like, oh, that's great. You have this question, or you're applying to this role and you want a little more context, or you want to get some feedback or ideas on how to approach it. We do a lot of that in the group chat as well, just kind of based on what people's needs are. So, and then we also, there's no reason, we actually have a few folks who have paired up and collaborated. So if you're in the cohort and someone else is like in a similar kind of position that you are in their job search, you can totally pair up and do more work together. And we have people do that quite regularly as well, because it always helps to have an accountability buddy as well, as somebody to kind of relate to what you're going through. And I didn't even know this till recently, but we even had a pair of roommates that went in the last cohort that did the job search together. One, I think, just started the new job last week, and the other one is really close. So we're hoping that the roommate pair is successful from the last boot camp. And then one other thing I also want to mention, because Elisa, you dropped in the chat too, like Albert's List events are awesome. There are a ton of free ones. There are some paid ones. If you haven't peeked at the Eventbrite profile for Albert's List, I just keep an eye on it. I got to tell you, I look at it all the time. I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea we were doing that event on that topic. Like, that's really helpful and great. And, I'm in the community, and even I don't even notice all of the great events that, especially Lisa and Albert kind of help to run. So, make sure to take advantage of that no matter what you do, because I find that really, really helpful. So I think we caught all the questions. Albert, Elisa, if anyone else has closing questions, toss them in there. But anything that I'm missing, anything else you want to add? Yeah, we're excited for this next cohort.
Yeah, we just had a couple more people join us here. And so we look forward to being in touch for the start of this. And as always, right, we got 13 days between now and then, 5 more early bird tickets. And actually, I also should mention too, we're we're also doing a webinar here in a half hour. And so if you stay at the end, I'm also going to be giving you some access to that too. So
Albert, drop that link and that free code in the chat. This is the time, right?
Yeah. Time sensitive.
They hung around. They lasted all the way through. Give them the goods. Love that.
Yeah. I just want to close out. I know, with the boot camp, it's kind of big time commitment, because a lot of people are like, oh, it's Mondays, and people have reached out on LinkedIn saying, like they might still be at work. And if you're on the fence about it or on the bubble, Joe, myself, and Albert, we would love to hear from you. Or if you just say, hey, I can't sign up for it now, but I'd love to do a future one, and here's dates and times that is best, we can maybe get an aggregate going of like when works for the majority of folks interested. And that way we can start setting up, future dates, because we want to get into more of a cadence and a rhythm. So you can recommend to other professionals looking, and so and get a feel for when the general one will be. So we're working on all that. But for now, this next one is going to start in a couple weeks, but do feel free to connect with us, and then we can keep you apprised of future ones, as well as just, if you want to say hello, and if you would love words of encouragement or resources, we're here to add value.
Yep. Love that. And, Albert and Lisa know that I'm the person who's a little squishy, and I don't mind being a little squishy at times too, because I just, and I would do kind of want to mention it, like, it is hard work job searching. And I'm sure there's a couple people on this call who've been doing it for a minute and you're like feeling frustrated, right? And we hear it, we feel it. And, I talked a little about that at the beginning when I was talking about resilience, like the job seeker process is a hard thing. And the goal is to have community. The goal is to have people around you to help you go through the process to be successful. And so if I were to like say one thing that I hope every single, person walks away from this webinar with is, do not do it alone. You do not have to be on your own. You don't have to be isolated, no matter what resources you choose to put around your job search. You matter, your work matters. There are opportunities out there for you. There are people looking for you. And please don't feel like you have to be isolated in the job search. Cause we've all been there where we're like tapping that button to apply to like 50 jobs, and I hope that you're not in that place where you're like, I apply to 50 jobs a day and I don't talk to anybody and I just stay focused. Like, don't do that. Find a community and have people help you. Okay. So I'll shut up about that, but I just wanted to say, it really, truly is a team sport.
Yeah. So I just shared our 6 o'clock presentation here. It's with Nader Molai. He's a Forbes career coach, and we're going to be focusing on how to master your job interview. And so we hope you join us for that.
Yeah.
I've gone ahead and dropped the link here, and you can use the code Albert's List Comp to get yourself in. So yeah.
Just real quick, we had one more last question in the Q&A. Just want to make sure we get it addressed. Benajir, sorry if I butchered that, was asking about getting visas. How easy is it to get a visa from Asia to Silicon Valley? And we do have a lot of inquiries from international applicants, and unfortunately, we don't offer support in visa or requirements. I do know a gentleman in Canada who can support you in that, but so it's hard to say how that works in terms of H-1B, but we can support you on the core fundamentals in terms of getting an interview with the company and getting those conversations started. But as far as how long the actual visa process is, we don't have any line of sight into that. Joe and Albert, feel free.
And we do have folks in the community that specifically help, and they're either at an agency or they do their own independent practice around like H-1B and other kinds of visa questions. So there are folks in the Albert's List community can support, right, if you need it. And a lot of it varies. It totally varies by company. A lot of bigger tech companies have a policy around that already, so it's sort of part of your job search process, and you can kind of build that in. And then obviously, like the nuts and bolts, we can't advise on that just because we're not experts, certainly in those kinds of areas. But we do have folks that we can say, hey, you should talk to so and so. That this is their immigration lawyer. This is their area of expertise. If you have this particular visa, et cetera. But yeah, I think the general broad answer is there are definitely tech companies that do hire folks. I think there's a more dynamic question that's occurring around that now, which is like, do they hire folks from like APAC and Asia and other regions in Europe and Africa, et cetera, that they may not need to relocate to like San Francisco and the Bay Area, which is a way more complex process. Having someone come in person. So like the fact that there's more remote and flexible work and things like that, I think does open up more possibilities, but of course it does vary by the tech company. So.
Good deal.
Good deal.
I think that's it. Hopefully we answered everyone's questions. I think, I'm good. Albert, anything I missed? Lisa, anything? Hopefully we gave everyone lots of good info, and like Elisa said, DM us, email us, like we're here to help. You've got our LinkedIn details now too. Just let us know if you have questions and or if you have other questions about the job search. And we're all about great resources, right? And before I forget, if you're not following, this is me being like, hey, here's another resource. If you're not following Hannah Morgan on LinkedIn or her blog, which is careersherpa.net, I'm going to drop that in the chat. One of my absolute favorite coaches. I was just reading something this morning from her. She's a great career coach, and she just writes about some really great stuff, great newsletter, all that. So while I remembered it, I figured I'd throw that into chat too. So.
All right. Well, wonderful. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and drop the link to our event again here, and I'll drop the code for you to get in for free, and we'll see you in 20 minutes or less. Thanks again, everybody. And
thanks, y'all.
We'll see you in the boot camp. Bye.
Have a great night.
Thank you. Bye.